Welcome to the Rethink Leadership podcast, available on all platforms including YouTube if you prefer to watch. My name is Jeremy Blaine, CEO of Performance Works International, Executive Director of the Transformational Leadership Acceleration Institute, and Managing Partner of Diversity Talent. My aim is to bring insights from leaders, experts, and highly talented professionals from around the world. Insights, stories, and advice from the front lines of modern leadership to engage, inspire, and mobilize progress back in the workplace. Every episode is a learning opportunity for us all. The Rethink Leadership podcast also supports charities around the world. Each episode is in aid of a cause chosen by my guests, and to date I'm proud to say we've supported over 60 global and local great causes. Today my guest is Matthew Brackett. With more than 30 years of experience in the field of personal, professional and intercultural leadership development, Matthew is much more than an executive coach. Matthew has a broad international and intercultural experience in leadership, educational and consulting roles in Italy, Ireland, England, Colombia, Chile and Mexico, as well as having been a special staff officer and chaplain in the United States Navy, serving both with sailors and Marines. He's a passionate educator and speaker about managing the human element in personal, professional, intercultural and organisational contexts. We discuss the differences between coaching, mentoring, counselling and being a confidant, their importance and when to use them, pulling on Matthew's experience in the US Navy as a chaplain and as a corporate leadership Swiss Army knife. This episode is in aid of UNICEF as a thank you to Matthew for joining us. We've made a donation to this fantastic organisation which works in over 190 countries and territories to save children's lives, defend their rights and to help them fulfil their potential from early childhood through to adolescence. And they never give up. Hi Matthew, please introduce yourself, your incredibly varied career and something about yourself that maybe not many people know.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you very much. So Matthew is my name, and from small town New England's the 10th of 13 children, which people always find fascinating. The 10th of 13 children, and 2 of my siblings are adopted. I always jokingly say that my parents, as they were having children, they wanted to outsource to improve the quality. And so they adopted 2 of my siblings. Beautiful family, 27 nephews and nieces. And at an early age, I think I grew up in an environment where generosity was taught to us in many ways, and also through example. And so that led me to want to do something impactful in the world and to really serve. And that led me to joining the seminary. So I was in the world of formal religious ministry, as I call it, for 30 years. There's 10 years of training and education, and then 20 years of active ministry. That was as a Catholic priest. There's obviously so much that we could talk about just right there, right? And very fortunate because that brought me to so many parts of the world to doing different types. So I wouldn't call it, when people think of missionary work, they think of, working with the poorest of the poor and things like that. I would consider myself, yes, always doing missionary work, but it was with all levels of society because we're trying to support people in all levels of society. So that brought me to, I was in 10 years in Italy. And in 3 different periods, and in Rome, I was 5 years in Ireland. I did a little bit of work in England, in your country, and in London. I was in Colombia and in Chile, and now I'm presently living in Mexico City. Also, part of my journey in ministry was also as a chaplain in the United States Navy, where I served sailors and Marines. So there's so much, I suppose there's so many stories there, and we're going to piece some of that out as during our conversation, I imagine. So a few things that people might not know about me, that I'm trilingual, and I do a lot of my work both in English and Spanish. So the other language would be Italian. I worked a lot in Italy. Most of my philosophy and theology and some specialized studies were all done in Italian. Other things that people might find interesting, and then this is more specific, Catholic specific, is I had a very close relationship with Pope John Paul II, which some people would remember, especially from our generation. And to really people find it fascinating. Not only that, but also, there's a lot of mystery around the Vatican. And so being able to work there, being able to go up to the papal apartments and, have access to all of these different things that people usually don't have access to, that people find that intriguing. And so much so that when I said goodbye to John Paul II in 2004, he died in 2005. I he gave me two gifts. One was, the little white cap that popes wear. So he gave me one of those that he had worn, and what they call a chalice, so the cup that priests or popes would use at mass, one that he had used during the celebration of it. So he gave that gift to me. A lot of people don't know that about me. Another thing is also being in Rome. I was able to be when they were recording the Passion of the Christ, and to be close to Mel Gibson and people that were making that movie. That was fascinating for many levels, just because I'd never been at a production of a film, and to see that and to be close to these people that were very involved in making that. And one last thing that people might know is I'm sort of what I would call a discouraged musician. I love music, and I always wish I could have. I play some instruments, but that's something that I want to continue to pursue, even just personally, because it's so good for the spirit. Playing music, singing is something that is very life-giving. At least that's my experience. So there we go. There's a few bits and pieces.
Wow, you're right. There's quite a lot to unpack there, isn't there? I mean, it's kind of a conversation in one right there. What a family background, and I can start to see how that foundation of generosity, of thinking about others, service to others, sort of took you forward. I was actually going to ask you whether it was the Vatican you worked in, and why Latin is not your fourth language then.
Right. Well, I studied Latin for 8 years, so I can read it and all that stuff. But I have a very difficult relationship with Latin. It's a very complex language, and it might just be the way it was taught to me that I created sort of a rejection. But yes, I am familiar with Latin, but I don't speak it.
Don't worry, we've all got a strange relationship with Latin, I can tell you, and a very difficult one trying to understand it. You're right. I do remember, I am from that generation that would remember well Pope John Paul II. And I just remember sort of seeing, just seemed like a really nice man, and somebody that could provide great comfort for others, that inspired and so on. And it must have been so something for you to be so close.
It was, yes, man. There's a lot there, but it was a great gift and privilege, and I think something that maybe I didn't realize at that moment what that meant. And not only what he did for people inside the church in the faith world, but also when we think of his background coming from communist Poland, and between him and President Reagan and other people that really influenced the fall of communism and so many other areas. And he's the Pope that most. And he was Pope for 25 years, and he was young, so he visited I don't know how many hundreds of countries, and he was just really, I suppose, teaching all of us how to reach out to others. And he did that on a continued basis.
Yeah, and then so from Pope John Paul II to Mel Gibson, that's quite a journey you've been on, I have to say.
Yes, as anything, they're always, even Pope John Paul II can be a controversial figure. Mel Gibson can be too, but these are all just windows into the reality of life and what people go through, and the reality of different, church, whether it be then cinema and Hollywood. And so, yes, fascinating windows that I've been fortunate to be able to gaze into.
Well, it sounds like I need to invite you back on to have another conversation here, to get some light into those other windows that you're talking about. But I'm going to fast forward from there, because you've used that experience to be a coach, a mentor, a counselor, a confidant from a leadership perspective. And in fact, you describe yourself from a business perspective these days as the human version of a sophisticated Swiss Army knife for leaders. Tell us more about that.
Right. Yes, that occurred to me one time when I was just trying to write, as we do in entrepreneurship, and trying to figure out who we are and what we do. And that image came to me because I'm very fortunate because of my life experience. I've been exposed to so much, and so the Swiss Army knife came to me because just it's multi-purpose and can be used for so many different things. And I would like leaders, senior leaders, to see me as someone that can do that for them. And why some of those aspects are, well, my global mindset, my intercultural versatility, because not only did I work and live in all those countries, and when you do so in ministry, you really become part of the fabric. You're not there you don't even feel like an expat or as a tourist. You're there as part of the fabric, part of people's lives. And also in the being in the church, as I worked with people, I lived in a house in in community, or I directed institutions that had 30, representation of 30 nationalities. And so the intercultural versatility is huge, and especially in today's world. Knowing how to navigate complex organizational politics and dynamics, and being part of the largest and longest lasting institution in the world, right? And having leadership roles there, right? And then in that church, then there's the religious orders. You would have heard terms like the Jesuits, the Franciscans, Dominicans. So I was part of the global religious group, religious order as they call it. And again, all of these, it's so funny because in the corporate world, people, they have a hard time with my background, they have a hard time grasping it. Like, how could I bring value to the corporate world, right? And so, and I've ran into a lot of closed doors because of that, because they have a hard time understanding the value that I can bring. Because when you think about ministry, you think, you were praying all day, or you were reading the Bible, and that's about all you know how to do, right? They don't realize that I was part of, then having worked in the Navy, in the Department of Defense, another, massive, complex organization. So navigating all that, and on a global and intercultural level, I think I'm very good at that, and the politics that come with that, and being able to work in Spanish and English. My expertise in DE&I, which is it's a complex topic, but it's also it's what everyone's talking about now, and so and then my expertise in people and in personal leadership, my expertise in professional leadership. And some of this is based on experience, on so many years of service to individuals, and of counseling and coaching and mentorship, but also I tried to always back up everything I do also with an academic preparation. So a bachelor's in philosophy, my master's in spiritual theology. So if someone, even another aspect of this is faith-based, anyone who wants to do faith-based work, I can do that. Now, I don't market myself as that, and that wouldn't be what I do on a daily basis, but people know that's one other aspect of that Swiss Army knife that they know that they can use because of that. And a specialized degree in personal development, and then a master's from Penn State in the psychology of leadership. And then something when I was in Chile, I did a degree on family education and counseling. So everything that I do, I've always tried to back it up with the academic, not because that's everything, right? Experience is so important, but when you can back it up with a solid academic foundation, I think it's much more valuable. And then I do a lot of, couples work, so romantic relationships, my social and cultural and emotional intelligence work that I do, ethics, which is a big deal, ethics in life and leadership, crisis management. So those are all the different things that I refer to with the Swiss Army knife. Now, there's a downside to it. As we know, the people like, they're looking for specialized. They want something who's very specialized. And I am, but I think I bring a lot of other services that come with those specializations.
I could do with one of these Swiss Army knives. I can tell you, not for the first time doing these podcasts, Matthew. I'm feeling like I've achieved nothing in my life right now, listening to you. And it surprises me, although it doesn't in some ways, because I come across leaders like this and organizations like this all the time myself. The closed mindset where they could kind of look black and white at one aspect of you or your career and say, well, how can that help? It's like managing a complex audit. I'm sure there is no more complicated organization than the Catholic Church. I mean, surely. So leading through that and collaborating and bringing people together is what you bring there. And I'm starting to understand why you also use 4 terms, which I'd like to go into, because you use coaching and mentoring. And I've seen a lot in your biography around being a confidant and a counselor. And often in business, we struggle with these 4 areas and we tend to ignore some for the others. So maybe you could help us. Could you define those 4 terms for us? Tell us what the difference is and when one or other should be used, if there is indeed a blueprint for that.
Of course. Well, this is a whole big topic in and of itself. Coaching, and I'm a coach with professional certified coach with ICF. If people are familiar with that credentialing body. So coaching, the way I always present coaching and the way I present my services is that I offer, we sit in kind of different lanes. So coaching is the art of listening, of very curious listening, and very creative and powerful questioning, with the conviction that the client, the coachee, has the answers inside of them. That's the easiest, simplest way that I can. And so it's a coach facilitates a process of discovery of those answers. I very much believe in that process because there's nothing is so powerful when someone is able to discover their own answers. And it's very easy for us as human beings as we switch to advisory mode and we switch to telling people how they should live their life. And oftentimes we do so with the greatest of intentions, but it might not be meaningful. We might be really missing the mark, even though we're doing it with the greatest of intentions. And so having that patience, and that's a space that I'm very comfortable in, is the one-on-one, and also just the ability to listen and to ask questions and to where people feel comfortable and valued and seen and respected. And then they have that safety and security where they can go through that process of self-discovery. Now, that's an art that we can always have to grow in that art and grow in exercising those muscles. It's never something that's easy and that comes naturally. So that's how I understand coaching. Mentorship is really more about someone who's a little bit further down the road, even just a few steps ahead on the road, and is where you, through your own experience, you're helping someone navigate those next few steps on their journey. And mentorship, that happens in so many fields. And oftentimes, when it comes to mentorship, it can be about very specific to fields of work or hobbies or whatever it is. But in ours, it's really the work that I do. It's the part of it. It's the art of winning the game of life, right? And so, mentoring people on how to live life better. That's why my motto for my business is lead better, love better, and live better. And we won't get into this today, but I've been through a lot of challenges. Even the decisions that I've had to make have been very challenging. And usually there's different things that lead to large decisions. And it's oftentimes, I say, there's 3 doors that lead to decisions and change. The door of love, the door of dreams, and the door of pain. And I've had to walk through the door of pain a lot to be able to, but I think that offers a lot of value, that when we're able to walk through that and integrate pain and become what I call befriend pain, I think there's so much that we can then, in that mentorship aspect, is to help others walk through their pain in a more meaningful way. Confidant is more of an umbrella concept, but I think because of ministry, confidentiality is a huge thing for me, and it's a space that I've lived in for so many decades, and I think it is very valuable, and it's undervalued in my view in the world today, where we're not good at keeping. I don't want to say keeping secrets, but you understand what I'm trying to say. But we're not at holding the sacredness of someone's information, someone's personal life, holding that very close to our hearts and maintaining that sacredness. We're very lazy, or we're just very careless in the way we deal with other people's information. And so confidant is really that it's someone that I can trust and I can share things with, and where I feel safe. So that's sort of an umbrella topic. Now, when we talk about counselor, there's a lot of counseling that I've had to do, and I would differentiate it from therapy. Therapy is more about how do I understand my present in the light of my past, and the coaching that I do is more about how do I work towards the future in light of my present. It's more about envisioning, we're moving forward. Both are very important, and in coaching and in the work that I do, there's things from the past that obviously come into play. But coaching is very forward oriented into visioning, and therapy is more about understanding our past and then healing that needs to be done so that I can understand my present better. And so counseling has a lot to do with, I suppose and I also present myself as an advisor, and that's more about, when you share everything that you're telling me, well, then from my own experience and from having worked with thousands and thousands of people, there might be some things that I could offer you for you to think about, options and viewpoints that you might not have thought about. So as the advisor in counseling and methods. So I really sit in those different lanes when I'm with someone and I explain that to them. So hopefully that's been helpful to explain what those terms mean.
They really do. In fact, I talk about myself. In my job, I talk about those differences, but you've clarified more for me, I would say here, and given me some really useful ways of looking at both of those or all four of those things, um, which I think would be very useful for those tuning in as well, because we all probably need a bit of all of those. What do you tend to see in the corporate world as far as the greatest need out of all of those four, Matthew?
I think I want to go back to just the human experience. In whatever world we're talking about, the human experience is that we are mysteries. I don't mean to get too philosophical. We are mysteries to ourselves. And we are, as human beings, we are relational. And so we discover ourselves through the eyes of the other. So this relationship, this one-on-one relationship, whether it be in any of those fields or of coaching or mentorship, confidant, is very important for us, because when we transform our thoughts or we transform our experiences or our emotions, when we transform them into words, we take more ownership of who we are and what we're living. And when we communicate it to someone else, whether through writing or through words, through verbal language, we're able to hear ourselves. And we're able to hear ourselves say things that we probably had never heard ourselves say before, and discover things about ourselves that we hadn't discovered because we've gone through that process. But we need someone else to be able to do that. And we need someone on the other end to be able to listen to us, to sort of embrace that message, to allow that message to, and then to mirror it back to us. And so that dynamic, that process, I think, is very important for us as human beings. But now there's also part of us as human beings, and I'll be a little bit more gender specific. As men, for example, we don't like to share that much. Vulnerability is a harder thing for us as men. And I don't want to generalize, but I am generalizing. Okay. And so we're much more I can figure this out on my own. Sometimes we equalize having someone to talk to with weakness. And that's an erroneous equation. It is not weakness. Rather, I think it's how it's growing in strength. The fact is that because of what I said, as human beings, we need this. And so in the corporate world or whatever world, this is of great value. And, in all the daily work that I do with people in senior leadership roles in very large global organizations, it's fascinating because, they have a lot of influence. They manage millions and billions of dollars and tons of people. But this very simple process is always one of discovery and and they find life-giving. And it's not because of anything really I say, but it's the process that I facilitate. Now, there's advice that I offer and things like that, or education that I can offer. But it's the power of it. And so I would really, in the corporate world, the difficulty, I guess, is that the more we grow in leadership, the more the ego is very present. And the ego it's a natural thing that we all need as human beings, but it can sometimes get in the way. It can be blinding. And so we think we're in, when we get to certain leadership positions, we're like, well, I no longer need to develop or to grow, or I no longer need anyone else, because if I got to where I'm at, then I must be pretty good, right? And so I would caution anyone, just human beings, and then any human beings in leadership roles, caution really our blindness, our unconscious, and the blindness that we have that we're unaware of, and that can really be our greatest enemy. And it's a very subtle enemy, as we well know. And we've seen many leaders fall from high places, and they fall hard, really because of their blindness.
Well, great response on that, and I think going much deeper than my question first sort of led to, really. Really helping us understand. And I'd just like to go back to the one point that you say. It's just that it's all about any of those things, any of those four. whether it's coaching, mentoring, counselling, being a confidant, we need somebody else to be there to listen, to trust, to talk to as much as they need it as well. And whatever you're practicing there, I think that's really the essence, that force that drives those together. I would like to at one go back, but also pick up another side of your career journey here, Matthew. And I would like to talk to those organizations and leaders that you said were quite closed also at first when they heard your background and thinking, what this Catholic person that has been in the Catholic Church, what can you do for us? And you've been two institutions actually. You've been in the forces in the Navy as a chaplain, and you've been in a spiritual stroke religious institution, the Catholic Church. And as well as being a consultant in the corporate world, whether that's a coach, a leadership expert, and so on. And because many of those listening here will be from the corporate world, I'm very interested to hear from these experiences of working with these two institutions, which are quite different in itself. What can the corporate world learn from them, and vice versa?
Yes. Thank you, Jeremy. So the institutions that I've been part of, and I have to say, I want to preface this with part of my decision to leave formal religious ministry was I think after 30 years, I became very tired and worn out by heavily structured organizations. I think I was very good at navigating them, but there's an aspect of it that sort of wore me out over time. There was something very specific about ministry in the church, and then being, again, inside of that church, then I was part of another organization called a religious order, right? So and then Department of Defense. Now, identity is very big in all of those organizations, and it's really not a job or it's really considered a vocation and a mission. Right? It's considered a lifestyle, which is it's different than the corporate world. Although some corporate people identity is a huge thing. We won't get into that now, but it's huge for us as human beings. But there's sometimes an easier divide between my professional life and my personal life in corporate. In church and in military, it's, the uniform and identity is huge, and mission is very important. Okay, and so the lifestyle is really, I think, much more consuming and encompassing in those areas. So I'm speaking about as somewhat of a difference. Now, we could say that some people in the corporate world live it like this as well, right? And rightly so. And then we could talk about, life work integration and balance and all those things. But the fact is that I was part of organizations that are highly structured and highly mission focused, and identity is huge. What I've seen across the board in these highly structured organizations, but also in my work with corporate, is that leadership can naturally become very disconnected from reality. I think it naturally happens because the farther you are away from sort of on the ground, well, it's naturally you're going to become much more disconnected. But I see that as that's just part of the human experience of leadership. But it's something that we have to be very careful with, because the being disconnected from reality, then you're making decisions that don't positively affect reality. Right? And it can be you can be missing the mark in the way you're making decisions and strategic decision making. So that's one thing that I've noticed. Another thing that I also noticed in leadership in all these areas is to remember to keep the end goal in mind. Now, that's a very basic principle, but it's something that we can, in a world where it's so fast paced and there's a lot of noise, and there's also a lot of politics that and we have to do with this, we have to, everything that's politically correct and in style in the corporate world or in other organizational world, we got to do this. And so we can really lose sight of the mission. And this is something that I want, in the military, there's so much wisdom that they just very mission focused. Now, it's a very specific, but I think there's a lot that we can learn from that. And they stay on that. This is who we are. This is what we do. And we can't let anything else distract us, because then if we let other things get in the way, then we're not going to fulfill our mission. And I think that's something that could be very valuable for a lot of in the corporate world, because people lose sight of, why do we exist as a company? What do we do? And really, what are our values and principles? A lot of times, and I don't want to go on a tangent here, but we have the values and the mission and the statement and all this that's, it looks very nice on the wall and it looks very nice on the website. But the disconnect between what that says and how we behave and how we live in an organization can sometimes be, that distance, that gap can be quite large. And that is confusing for people. And it can create a lot of conflict, because we say we stand for this, but we're all living and behaving in a very different way. So, and then the one other thing I want to say is sometimes we want to make mission and execution fit a structure, rather than structure serving our mission and our efficient execution. So it's really about versatility. And these very heavily hierarchical organizations can really get stuck in this. And even some corporate companies that I work with that are massive, I see this on a regular basis as well. And so anyways, I think that point is where we make our mission and execution has to fit a structure, rather than creating a structure that fits mission and efficient execution. And one last thing is, whether it be church, because we say the church, we say the military, or we can say a name of a company, but there's no person. It's an entity. It's an impersonal entity. Right. And I would always, Marines complaining about the Marine Corps, people in church complaining about the church, but who is it? And so that's the danger in these massive organizations, is that no one, in the end, since everyone's just sort of passing through, no one takes complete ownership for what's going on and for the change that can be made. And then, because then you don't even know who to point the finger to. Well, the military, the Navy, the Marine Corps, the church, but who are the people, right? Or if we say put a name of the company in there, this, whatever. But the people in leadership, they are people that can make change, that can make that organization better. And oftentimes they might not do everything they can to make that change, because, well, I are in this position and then I'll promote, or then I'll retire. That's, and I think we can definitely, I think we can lead better. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, it resonates actually. I had another guest a couple of seasons ago, James Cross, who is next commander of the British Army, and he talked about the importance of mission command and the chain of decision making that happens from there. Almost kind of going into that, it's like, actually, as long as we are all on board with the mission, we understand the mission and the parameters of the mission, it can be very empowering for those underneath the commanders to then go and execute in a way that is behind the mission parameters, but what you see on the ground, not what we might be removed from over there. So that fits beautifully with what you said there. Is that we can, in the corporate world, sometimes it's over structured and over processed, and it can get in the way of implementation, which fails over 60% of the times, strategy execution in organizations. And I'm sure that's a big part of it. And that final element, when you were talking there, for me, I just boiled it down to just make it human centered, because yes, we might be working for Unilever, Procter and Gamble, or whoever it is, but actually we're all people, and the leader is a person too. You don't know what's going on inside there. The individual contributor is a person, so we all need to be much more human centered. To come back to that, and as you were talking, I was quite interested to know that you must have therefore had experiences of coaching or mentoring people in the Navy, of course, in the corporate world, and maybe even in the church. And without naming names, of course, can you give us examples of the type of conversations and maybe similarities that you found sort of across those, or major differences?
Really, this in all my work, in different countries, different cultures, different languages, different environments, I found that the human person is the human person. The expressions sometimes vary, but the problems we have, the challenges that we have, the circumstances are different, but they end up being very much the same. So, and I think and I want to go back to, I suppose what I want to, and this will lead us probably into the next segment, is people have a basic need. And I think as leaders, or as in a family, if we talk about parents or in relationships, if we're able to do this, everything changes. We all have a need that we want to be seen. We want to be listened to. We want to feel valued, recognized, appreciated. And we all want to know where we stand. And I would say that's also where feedback comes into play. So in all the different roles that I've had, and of sitting with people in all those different spaces, that's when you help someone feel that they are seen, listened, valued, and whatever they're going through, whether it be something very joyful and ecstatic, or whether it be something very tragic, that they're able to sit there and sense that they are seen, listened to, valued, recognized, appreciated. It's a great service that we can offer to human beings, to others. And going back to what you said about the human element, whether you're, a CEO or if you're just starting an organization, you have those same needs. Now, the problems you're dealing with might be very different, right? The higher you go, maybe the larger the problems, right? And the more complex the decision-making. So being able to create that space of we always talk about as a confidant, as confidentiality, of a safe space where people can share what they're going through and kind of take away the facade and take away the titles. It's a very liberating. Now, it's very hard for humans to do that, but it's very liberating. So that's a very broad answer, but it can be helpful.
I know. Thank you for that. And it resonates with the messages that you talked about before. And it's no accident that a lot of the research coming out over the last, particularly over the last 5 years, when we also count the pandemic in this, has brought out the need for organizations, their leaders and their managers to be more human-centered in their approach, but also the need for leaders and managers to be supported in the same way, because they have the same angst, the same worries, the same anxieties, and they're starting to talk about that more. So they're probably there before as well, but they started to be there.
Right.
So the importance of coaching and mentoring, and even embracing counselling and finding that confidant who you can trust becomes so important for anybody, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Never mind. I mean, I'm maybe I can say leaders, but I could say absolutely anybody. But I will summarize with this, and it's been such an insightful discussion. I've written, now you've probably seen me writing so many notes as you've been talking about here, and I'd really like you to try and distill this down now, Matthew, to 3 to 5 points or pieces of advice that you could offer modern day leaders about their own journey in business. So the type of people that you coach, if you like, their own development, their own self-care in what are really uncertain, unpredictable, and constantly changing times.
Thank you, Jeremy. A few things come to mind, as you said. One is in intentional investment in my personal and professional growth. I'll sort of leave it at that. There's so many different things, and I say that this is all about self-awareness. Self-awareness, I say, is the greatest leadership asset, and the lack of self-awareness, one of the greatest leadership liabilities. The danger is that we, as human beings, we all think that we are perfectly and 100% self-aware. And the fact is that we're not, right? That we have all these blind spots. And the more we grow in leadership, well, the better I know myself, and so the more self-aware I will consider myself. And so again, going back to the point about where our blindnesses become our greatest enemies, but since we don't know they're there. So intentional investment in personal and professional growth. And creating mechanisms with this is creating mechanisms in an organization where I can get honest feedback. And one of those ways is also through the 360 assessments, which I find that leaders are very afraid of those. Because it's uncomfortable. But at the same time, it's valuable. And with that, we have to understand that any feedback we get always has a subjective element to it. None of it's dogmatic, but they're all sort of shadows of truth that when we put that puzzle together with all the different pieces, well, we see a lot more. We see a lot more about life. We see a lot more how we're perceived, how we're seen, my areas of opportunity. So that's one of the big topic around intentional investment in personal and professional growth. The other one is priorities. And this, when I work with people, I really meet them at that intersection between the personal and professional, so they protect their priorities. So I think priorities sometimes unconsciously or unintentionally suffer at what we would call the altar of success. And if the priorities suffer at the altar of success, well, is that really the altar of success, or is it like an imitation altar, right? If my priorities are suffering, am I really then successful? So what are my priorities in my personal and professional life, and how can I build my life and my routines around those so that I am protecting the sacredness of these priorities? Another element is surround myself with a solid team of advisors. Some people in leadership roles think that they have to have the answer to everything. And I see this in church, I see this in the military, and it was sort of like, if I don't know the answer to everything, then I'm not good at my job. I'm not who I'm supposed to be. And so I have to know everything. No, you don't. Right. And the greatest leaders I worked with, they knew when their lane sort of stopped, when their area of expertise stopped, and then they knew how to access advisors. And I was one of those advisors as a chaplain, where I was included in the picture so that they would have a better understanding of the situation and of possible ways to better deal with it. And so I think to surround myself with a solid team of advisors and to use them. And then one last thing is that, and I use coaching and training leaders, I always say one of the greatest gifts that we can give our people is the gift of clarity of communication. And communication is so important for us as human beings. Well, it's something that we all struggle with. And so oftentimes we struggle with clarity of communication, but our human brain needs clarity. And that's why feedback, going back to what I said before, feedback is so important. People want to know where they stand. But as humans, we have a hard time giving feedback because we don't know how to present it, how to couch, especially if it's challenging. How am I going to be perceived? How it's going to be interpreted? Blah, 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 all that. But clarity of communication, whether it be in romantic relationships, whether it be in families, whether it be in professional life, is so to be the gift of clarity of communication. So thank you, Jeremy.
Great, Matthew. The great points there, and one that certainly resonated with me when you talked about it as well was that surrounding yourself with a solid team of advisors, not necessarily the people that you like to be with or your friends or whatever, but actually advisors who can be honest with you. And that also goes for members of your board, I suppose, because I'm a non-exec director and I do sit on a couple of boards, and
Right.
I am increasingly worried sometimes at the where my fellow advisors have come from. They have been fantastic in business in the 20th century, and they can bring certain elements of that into the advisory capacity, but they don't have the experience of where we are in 2023 or 2025, if you like, and looking ahead to 2030. So those advisors really need to understand the context of what leaders or what you are dealing with in your life, in business, wherever, as much as being able to be open and trusting, of course, for you as a leader to share with. Would you agree with that, Matthew?
I would, yeah, and board of advisors, that's a whole nother topic, but there's so much there.
There is.
I would.
There is.
It's so important.
Well, look, Go ahead, Matthew. Go ahead.
Yes, I know we're going over time, but so important because boards of advisors they have so much power in organizations, whether it be nonprofits or for profits, and oftentimes they're also disconnected, or they're not up to date on things, or they're there for other reasons because it's an honor to be on a board, right? Or there might be other interests, and they can make such a difference. But in my view, sometimes they don't make that huge difference that they can make because maybe they hold back, or they want to say, they're maybe saying things that want to be heard and not things that need to be heard. And there's so much there, but the functionality of boards, I think it's a huge topic that often isn't talked about. But thank you.
You're right. We'll park that for another chat then, and the Catholic Church one as well, because that sounds like an interesting one too. Look, thanks very much for joining me. There's such value that has come out of this, and I'm absolutely sure that many of those tuning in will want to find out more and get in touch. How do they do that, Matthew?
They can find me on my website, brackettalliance.com, and also on all the platforms, LinkedIn at Matthew Brackett, Instagram Matthew Brackett, Facebook as well, Matthew Brackett. So yes, that's where they can find me. And of course, welcome to either for coaching clients or also speaking engagements, however I can bring value to people into the organizations.
Thank you very much indeed. And I think going right to the beginning when we discovered you did have a fourth language actually in Latin, I think I've been scraping the old Latin out of my head, and I believe all I need to say to you now is vale, Matthew.
Well, there we go.
And thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeremy.
Bye-bye. Thanks for tuning in to the Rethink Leadership podcast with me, Jeremy Blaine. Please like, comment, and support us on your favourite platform, and subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can watch as well as listen to each episode.